Imagine you took 4 guitarists and then got them to play in unison. There's no way that all 4 guitarists could play precisely the same thing. And this is what chorusing does. Chorusing takes your original guitar signal, delays it by 20 to 40 milliseconds, detunes it, and then modulates it with a low frequency oscillator, which is also known as an LFO. Most choruses are also capable of generating multiple copies of that original signal, this allowing for a much more lush sounding chorus sound. Now I've got 3 different chorus pedals here, and each of them are slightly different in that they've got slightly different controls. So let's have a look at how the 3 choruses compare sonically and how you can set up similar sounds using the parameters. So here we have the small clone made by Electro-Harmonix, and most chorus pedals will have 3 basic parameters. You've got the rate, the depth, and the level. Now the rate governs how fast the shimmer is, or how fast the actual sweep modulates. So in the case of the small clone here, we can set it fairly slow. And you'll hear as we speed up, the shimmer will increase in intensity. So now most choruses also have a variable depth control. Now the thing with the small clone is it's just got a single button that basically switches the depth from shallow to deep. So at the moment it's set shallow, so it's just giving you a subtle shimmer. But if we turn the depth mode into the up position, you'll hear how the depth changes to quite a deep modulation. It almost sounds out of tune. It's working like a vibrato, so you'll find that high or fast rates with the depth set to deep will sound a bit too much out of tune. But if you reduce the rate down to quite a slow rate, the effect is much more subtle. So, if I was playing a nice, clean ballads, I would probably set the depth to the lowest setting and maybe a medium shimmer. So I'd probably put the knob in the 12 o'clock position, so straight up, and then I would probably switch to the middle pickup and a nice clean sound. So when you add some compression and some reverb or delay to the sound, you're going to end up with quite a beautiful sound. And later on in the DVD, we'll be experimenting with grouping multiple effects, and we'll have a listen to how chorus can really make a clean sound, quite beautiful. So if we were to use a chorus with, say, distortion, you'd end up with quite an 80s rock type sound. So I'd probably reduce the rate down slightly. And again, it's up to you whether you like the low depth or the deep. chorus with heavy gain sounds is quite reminiscent of the 80s rock era. There was a lot of sounds going around at the time. This is when big fat stereo choruses made a big impact, and you can hear it on a lot of 80s rock. So that's the small clone. Let's move on to our next chorus, which has an extra control. The Ashton CR30 has a couple of different knobs that differ from the small clone pedal. The first thing you'll notice is that it's got a variable depth knob. Now the small clone only had the switch to allow toggling between two preset depths, whereas the CR30 allows you to vary the depth. It still has a rate control in the same way as the small clone, but it has a level control. Now, when you start getting into effects such as chorus, phases, flanges, often they'll have what's known as a wet signal and a dry signal. Now, wet refers to the affected part of the signal, whereas the dry signal refers to the signal coming directly from your guitar or your preamp. So basically, with this pedal, the dry signal is always going through, but you've got a variation on how much of the wet signal comes through. So if I turn it to the minimum, now it'll be totally just dry. So if I want to mix the signal of the actual chorus into it, I need to turn it up. So at the maximum, I'm getting an equal amount of dry signal to my wet signal. So hearing a fairly lush chorus sound there. And in the same way as the small clone, I'll just put the depth to full and the rate to full, and this is going to be a fairly out of control sound. Probably okay if you want to do a horror movie or something, a soundtrack to a sci-fi movie. But if you're going to use the depth at high levels, then bring the rate down. You'll find that the depth won't sound nearly as overly dramatic when you've got a slower rate. So if I'm using a distorted tone, you'll find that these parameters become overly accentuated. So you can hear at a lower rate, it doesn't sound nearly as bad. Now, for me, I would probably reduce the depth down a little bit if I was using it for like an 80s rock tone, then fairly slow rate and the depth probably to about 2/3. And if we have a listen to some clean chorusing. It's got a fairly nice sound. Again, when you start coupling this with reverb and delay, it's going to be a really beautiful sound. So for a nice clean chorus, I would probably cut the depth down a little bit more and maybe increase the rate just to give it a little bit more shimmer. And probably switch to my middle pickup, which will give me a much brighter tone. So that's the Ashton CR30. So moving on to the Boss C5 Chorus Ensemble. You'll notice that this pedal has an effect level, a rate and a depth in the same way as our Ashton CR30 had. Now, where this pedal differs is that it's got a filter control. The filter works in the same way as an EQ, but instead of being able to boost frequencies, it only cuts. So this can be particularly handy if your preamp is overly trebly or overly bassy. You can actually cut some of the tone going into the chorus so that you can basically tailor the sound based on how your preamp is feeding into it. So to give you an example, if I'm playing, say, I'll just go to a dirty tone, and I'll cut some of the bottom end and have a listen to how the frequencies change as I'm cutting the bottom end. So you can hear it get a lot thinner than it was. So I'll put those frequencies back in again. So my preamp tone is fairly flat. It's not overly bottomy or it's not overly trebly. So, I probably wouldn't bother tweaking that control too much. In the same way, the high frequency trim allows me to tailor the top end. So if I'm using a clean sound that might be overly sharp or brittle, I can actually trim some of the high frequencies down to basically tame it down a little bit. So, if I'm using a clean sound and it's a bit too sharp, so I can cut some of those high frequencies. So, it's a fairly handy control to have. Now, one last thing that this particular pedal has that the other two don't is stereo outputs. This is really great if you're running a stereo power amp or you want to run stereo for recording. You can basically place the chorus directly after your preamp in the effects chain, and from the outputs you can then plug into your stereo reverb or stereo delay, so you can maintain a stereo effects chain from the chorus onwards. It's up to you where you place the chorus in the effects chain, and there's definitely no right or wrong way. For me, I prefer to have the chorus directly after the preamp, and then I'll feed my time-based effects such as the reverb and the delay directly after the chorus. So experiment with different positions in the effects chain and see what works for you.